Welcome to Know What I Mean. My name's George.
My name's Oscar. And it was really interesting noticing the pace throughout this episode. I feel it felt like there was quite a variation of like energy and sort of the feel of it changed quite a lot throughout the whole episode. I'm really interested to listen to it back, actually.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I guess it changed quite a bit. We ended up on kind of a bit of a different topic to where we started, but it felt really good. I think there's some great stuff in here. We've kind of shared some of the things that we've learned or things that have been meaningful for us, and I hope you enjoy listening to these things. And it's some things that I need reminders of myself sometimes, so hopefully this might remind you guys of some things that you've forgotten or haven't thought about for a while. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So the quote I've chosen for this week is from Thomas Carlisle, and it is not our goal to see what lies dimly in the distance, but to do what clearly lies at hand. This is a quote I heard a long time ago, actually, from a book by Dale Carnegie called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And this book is actually probably one of the books that's influenced my life the most in just my day-to-day experience of being. It really has been changed by this book, just because it taught me so many things about worry and how to kind of manage that in your life. And I occasionally realize and look back and think, wow, I do all these things automatically now because I really absorbed the things that I read in that book. So yeah, to me, what this quote really encapsulates is just to stop focusing on the future and just trying to work out everything, and just bringing myself back to the present, to just focus on, right, what is the next step? What should I do now? And it's just such a beautiful reminder of that. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your initial thoughts on it.
With what you just said, actually, I'm intrigued to, I guess, mirror something back, which is that I think that this is one of those quotes that will work for a certain proportion of people and not for another proportion of people. I was just thinking how maybe both you and I share this tendency to try and have it figured out and have, basically to pre-work things out. It's how it's a sense of maybe wanting to be in control and not end up looking stupid and making sure that we're controlling appearances and things like that. Whereas other people, I just had this person in my mind of maybe someone that lives too much day to day, is partying all the time or just not really considering the future at all. And how maybe this is one of those quotes that is particularly applicable to you and me, but maybe not for everyone, So I still think, we can definitely focus on it as a quote, but I just wanted to say initially that I think it's interesting that this isn't one of those ones that seems to be universal, I wouldn't say.
Yeah. I was to say, yeah, I think you're right. I think it can fall more into like advice or something that you might want to tell for me to tell myself, or if you see someone who's clearly doing this, they're just getting overstimulated and just thinking about everything that's going to happen in the future and just getting kind of paralyzed by that, then that's someone who you can kind of share this quote with, or just to help remind them to focus on the things that there are to do now, rather than getting lost in these kind of hypothetical futures.
Yeah, it's funny that you should say that, because this quote was directly applied last night, actually, because 𝗚𝗲, my girlfriend, was getting quite anxious about stuff around climate change. There's obviously a lot of stuff in the news around that at the moment, and it was one of those things where she was explaining how she had kind of got into a bit of a hole of anxiety around it, and it had really snagged. You know, there was like, it definitely got a hook in, and there was this kind of spiraling around it. And it was exactly the essence of this quote of that I was trying to put across, I guess, of the, you know, and this is particular advice for particular times. This isn't a universal bit of advice, but it is like something like climate change, or I'm not even going to use that because I think that's too emotive right now. But say, for example, when nuclear war was like a real on people's minds, you know, like there was, you know, like say in the Cold War or whatever, when people really thought that any day, you know, they could just be obliterated, like there just wouldn't be anything left, and that was on people's psyche. You know, it's like at that time it is a case of that you've got this mental construct of like the end or like apocalypse. You know, there's this huge thing, and it is, in a way, that is dimly in the distance, even though it felt I guess dimly in the distance in the way that I'm talking about it here is it's sort of, it's not your direct experience, it's some concept you've got of some potential future. It's like it's this kind of big blob of future, this big thing, and trying to deal with that as a thing, like the idea of nuclear war, like it's fucking terrifying. But the reality is you're never going to be dealing with it in that way. You're only ever dealing with what is happening now, or your day to day. You know, and so it's like, you know, in war and in like really terrible circumstances, people just live day to day and they work it out and have to adapt, and it is really difficult, but you're never actually encountering this enormous thing that you're thinking about. You're only ever encountering your actual direct situation that is right in front of you. And you know, a lot of people, another example of this is COVID. You know, it's like if we had been told at the start of COVID, you're going to be in for like 2/3 of this year, like just in your house. If people, you tell that to some people and they were like, there's no way that I could cope with that. There is absolutely zero way that I could cope with that. But the reality is it in the thing itself, you just take it each day as it comes, you know, and some days are harder than others, but you're never actually dealing with the year of COVID or, you know, any of that. You're just dealing with the circumstances that are right in front of you. So I think there's a lot of examples of this in practice in a way.
And one thing that I thought about a lot with this quote is how, you know, this thing of trying to think of this amorphous future problem, what that can actually do is change the future. Because if you're spending all your time thinking about the problem, you're not actually moving towards solving this problem. You know, sometimes the most effective thing that you can do on something is not to spend time worrying about it. Like, this is a really important thing, this is going to go wrong, whatever it is. Like, it is to just bring yourself back to, okay, what's under my control? What can I do to move the needle in the direction that I think is right and is going to help things? So yeah, there's an aspect to this thinking of the future, which I definitely can fall into. And you're kind of really assuming that you're on pause, that you're kind of in this frozen state and you're trying to work out what's best and plan out these different futures, but you're not frozen. You're still moving. You know, the time is still passing. And if you're always stuck in this future possibility sort of way of thinking and kind of just muddling by to get through whatever you need to, but like, you know, spending your focus in the future on what may or may not happen, then you're squandering the present. And this is something it can feel like it's a one-off, but it's really not. It's a habit. You know, the habit of thinking about the future and not focusing on what needs to be done now is a habit. There's always going to be sort of scary shit that could happen in the future, things that you can worry about. And there's always going to be things in the present that you can do to improve your current experience and improve the likelihood of positive outcomes for you and, you know, everything that you care about. So I think it's really important to understand that those things are habits rather than just a temporary thing of you worrying about something. Because if you look back in your life and you think about, you know, the state you're in now is probably fairly similar to the state you've been in like 10 or 20 years ago. Like the states of how you're worrying about things or whatever it is, those things often stay quite similar. However, you know, you've got through all of those things, you've got to this point, and it's kind of interesting to look back about all that worrying that you might have done and to really reflect on, like, is that how I wish I'd spent my time. Now obviously you don't want to start, you know, just regretting it, but you can I mean, I guess maybe regretting it might not be the worst thing, because at least that kind of gives you a kick to be like, right, I'm gonna stop doing that, or I'm gonna make an effort to really focus on doing the best of what I can now. And that's something that can be a very meaningful habit to change, and just an ongoing practice, and something that I do my best to keep bringing myself back to as much as I can.
And I guess it's worth saying that it is part of being alive to have these reflections. You know, it's to try and anticipate and predict what is coming is just super normal. You know, it's just a way of staying safe and trying to navigate. And yeah, as you say, in a way that the what's being dealt with this quote is that there is a magnetic pull in all of us to be, or in most of us, towards this state of anticipation, prediction, often like with a negativity bias, often quite catastrophic prediction. And there's a magnetism to that, and we are always going to be being pulled towards something like that kind of sense. And yeah, it's a practice to be with what clearly lies at hand, because that isn't the natural state of being for most of us. You know, that does take a lot of training. You know, it's just being present, you know, like what is going on now, you know, like what's happening, what can I deal with right now. I remember at uni, this is actually probably the thing I'm most proud of at uni. It was just a really cool situation. So there's this really famous designer who comes in called Ian Anderson, and he comes in and does these workshops, these yearly workshops at the art school that I went to. And this was the last of the set of workshops that he was doing. And we were given this pretty absurd brief. This is his style, is basically to set design briefs that are, it's not like they're impossible, but they're like, they'll just twist your thinking into coming up with really like abstract solutions and really trying to like figure out like how it's almost like a riddle, basically, a lot of his briefs. On this particular brief, we were set in different groups of say 5 or 6 people, and we were given a color, and the color that convinced this boardroom that your color was essentially the most important color. We had a whole day to come up with this solution in our group of 5, and we spent probably 2/3 of that day basically just doing that thing where you like scrunch up bits of paper and just chuck it in the bin, because we were trying to be clever with the solutions we were coming up with, and we just kept on hitting brick walls. And a lot of the issues that we were having was the group dynamic. It basically, we just weren't able to come up with any ideas that we were happy with as a group. And it started getting to the point where the pressure was really on in terms of the timing, and there was this, you know, you are worried because you're presenting to the entire year who is doing this project this idea, and you didn't want to look like an idiot. So there was a real world consequence to what we were doing in a way. And at a certain point, there was just this switch from being in that mode of what lies dimly in the distance, i.e. like, what the fuck are we actually going to do? Like, we're going to look really silly if we don't have anything to show. And we're 2/3 of the way through the time now, and we don't have anything. Going from that to what clearly lies at hand, you know. And it was literally like a gear. I remember like within the group just switching this gear and just being like, we had a kind of some sort of vague idea, and it was just like, all right, we're just doubling down on this. And it just ended up being that there wasn't any thought involved, hardly any thought involved. It was literally just like action, like, okay, we're setting up this projector in this way, and we're going to put it here, and we're going to get on this thing. And it was just like working completely flat out. And as a team, we just fucking smashed it. Like, we absolutely just did like this sick presentation. And it was just such an interesting moment of like this switch in gear and kind of collective energy shift from this sort of anxious anticipation into just being like, okay, we just need to act. We don't have time to be thinking, how the hell are we going to get this right, and just switch into we just switch into another gear. And like, I was so proud of the outcome that we had, and it was just such a magical experience of that actually happening. It was really odd, but like quite magical experience doing that project. Yeah.
So it was like you just switched the gear and were like, right, this is going from being a project, like being from this kind of what are we going to do, to like just do it. Like whatever we've got now, we're just going to commit to this and be like, this is the best way to move forward.
Yeah, exactly. And it seemed to just fall into place at that point, because it really was a level of just putting our heart into it, as opposed to just having that doubt and trying to like figure out the whole thing. Yeah, it's actually pretty difficult to explain, but I'm sure everyone has experience of when something does click into place in that way.
Yeah, I was thinking with this quote about taking imperfect action, how that can actually be quite a good thing to remind myself of. And I was actually thinking about this the other day. I was helping my mum with the garden, and there was like loads of soil that needed moving from one place to another. And I felt myself kind of, I was stopping and like thinking like, what is the most efficient way to like move the soil? Like, how can I minimize trips? And like, but then I just thought like, the most important thing is just the total amount of time of me putting effort into moving the soil from one place to another. I might think of like better ways to do it, or you might find those ways through doing. Often you can actually get further by just like, okay, this makes sense. I mean, I'm just going to take the shovel and put it in there, and then just start doing it, and then being like, as you're going like, oh shit, maybe I can use this bucket and then just put it in there, and then that'll be easier to like throw it into the thing. And just adapting, because you learn so much through doing and through actually being there. It's like if you were, I don't know, say like you take my work, like a restaurant, for example, and you're some manager who's tasked with, making the place run more efficiently. Like you could be, just think like, okay, I'm going to go in and these are the different things we can do. But like maybe the best thing is just to start, like just to work there and to be like, okay, how could I speed that thing up? How could I speed that thing up? Like there's, weirdly enough, actually just taking imperfect action and then course correcting is often like a more effective way to do things, as long as you're not going to do things that are irreversible, things that aren't going to like negatively impact things significantly. But generally, unless it's like to do with, I don't know, highly dangerous things like nuclear shit, or like any things that you could mess up if you're not really being as safe as possible. But generally with so many things, man, once I start and just do them, then I can adapt with it. It's the same with me doing YouTube videos, where I would kind of spend ages trying to plan and then realize that actually it's better to just get stuck in and start making videos and adapt and see how you can improve them from there, rather than trying to come up with the perfect structure for a video on paper. Just do like a decent structure for a video, film it, and then the next one you can see how you can improve and make it better. And that's a big thing that I've been working on in my life. And I think that can be very productive to just get stuck in.
I really relate to that. I'm having that experience real time the last month and a half of just doing mural work full time, and it's just ridiculous like how much I've learned by just showing up and doing. I haven't spent any time online like really researching stuff and like how the hell, what's the best way of like, it's literally just like, so this is just like the most simple example, but it's like I was lugging around this telescopic ladder, which it's essentially a ladder that's like collapsible and you can make really small, and it's telescopic because it kind of looks like a telescope, like the poles like collapse into one another, and they're great. They're like this ingenious invention, but like to just carry around, they're not light, I wouldn't say. So carrying it around is quite hard work, and I was taking it to paint spots where what I would need is literally a little step, like this, just a little boost, essentially. Like I don't need to get up high. I'd literally just like, I need to be slightly taller than I am. And I was carrying around this collapsible ladder for like ages and ages, and then it was just like the last month and a half, it's just like, why don't I just get a little step ladder? I'll just buy it. And it's such a simple thing, but it's the weight of what I carry around often is lighter by, you know, it's so much lighter by this little change that I made of just investing under 20 quid in this like tiny step that I carry around. That's this little plastic thing, right? And it's loads of decisions essentially like that, to either buy things or to do kind of 2-in-1 things where I can, I'm essentially just figuring out as I go along. But the more I paint, then the more I figure out and the easier the process gets. And also when I'm then speaking to clients, because of my experience, then I'm able to advise them in lots of ways that I wouldn't be able to advise earlier. And it is not at all by being mentored. It's literally just like making these mistakes, just like, oh my God, I'm just like wasting so much energy on something that is easily fixable. And I'm just used to doing it this way, but I can just make this tiny change, and then I just don't have to, I don't have to deal with that anymore. And it is amazing. Like that's 100% how you learn the most. But I suppose the aspect that you need to have in there is receptivity. Like you actually have to be receptive that you're making the mistake in the first place, because it's not like we do have this tendency of having bad habits where we are just wasting a ton of energy and we're not even quite aware that we're doing it. So you need to be receptive and open to changing the way that you do things, you know, because without that, then you just get stuck in whatever way that you've been doing it. So
and the thing I like about it is just it's more organic. And this is, I mean, we've talked about this before. I don't know if we talked about it so much on the podcast, but like how I used to really try and break things down into like what is, you know, distill things into the perfect truths, or like the perfect system for things. And the world just doesn't really work like that. It's a little bit more organic and wiggly and weird and adaptive, and things are messy, and that is just part of life. And I've definitely learned to embrace that more, because it was something where I really was trying to like control everything and keep it into, you know, put everything into its little boxes and come up with these systems. And that can be a useful kind of process to do, to, you know, trying to understand the world. But I think it's also helpful to embrace the messiness of it and realize that there's not everything's going to be perfectly, you know, you're not going to just come up with the perfect plan and then execute that and everything goes perfectly. You know, it's good to just get stuck in and be okay with things being quite messy and organically shifting and changing, and you seeing what's needed in the moment.
But I think that relates to our character. So something I'm just thinking about with that is just that, I mean, my experience of growing up was definitely that I had that tendency to want to figure it out and have it locked down and have my system, so I know and I can predict what's going to happen, so I can see what lies dimly in the distance. Like that was a tendency, and it's just because I felt a bit insecure, so I wanted something secure. And if I'd figured it out, then I knew what was coming. And so that was easy. I remember being, I don't know, I was a teenager. I was probably like 15 or 16 or something like that. And just getting into self-help stuff. And I remember going to this party, and for some reason, I just felt so confident at this party. I was just like chatting to loads of people, and just everything was just fucking sick. I was just so happy with how confident I was. And I remember coming home and being like, I want to be like that every time I do anything, you know? And so I tried to figure out exactly what I had done before and how that had happened, you know? And then the next time I went out, I was so disappointed because I felt awkward. And I was like, but I've done all the same stuff, you know, like why the hell, why can't I control how I feel like about this, you know? Because I just thought if I had the same formula, it would just work that way. And it didn't work like that. And I think one thing I've realized growing up is just that, I guess, because you see these cycles, that things aren't predictable and things are weird, and some days you feel great and other days you feel bad, and there's not always like any real reason. It's just like it is just quite strange, like the kind of chemical kind of reaction that happens in your brain on certain days, and you just feel like shit, and that's it. And there is certain level of control, but a lot of the time there isn't. And it's like just having more, I mean, my sense is just having more faith that things are okay. You know, it's just like, oh, like I don't feel so confident today, or I'm a bit awkward today, or, you know, I'll go to a social thing and I can't think of anything to say. You know, it's like, okay, that's not big. I know it's not always like that. That's okay. You know, that's just like, I'm a bit like that today. That's kind of weird, but it's that's dealing with, you know, that's what clearly lies at hand. I'm just like dealing with it as it comes and just having faith that things are generally all right, you know, like whereas when I was younger, I didn't have that trust, you know. I wanted to have it like, what is exactly going on, you know. The reason why I said that I think it is different for different characters is obviously for a lot of people when they're growing up and teenagers, like this is just not an issue for them. If anything, it's at a different extreme where it's like nothing is clear and I'm just acting on a whim almost all the time. And I'm not trying to see what dimly lies in the distance. I'm literally just responding, you know. And I remember envying that and seeing that in other people, but that obviously has its own issues. And then getting into adulthood and being like, no, I want to see what lies dimly in the distance. I want to be able to have a little bit more control over my life. Whereas I think for us, it was the other way. It's like really holding on too tightly to the control and the reins and needing to loosen that. Whereas for other people, they need to kind of pull their shit together, you know, like in a different kind of way as they get older. So I do think it varies a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to clarify. And yeah, you're naturally going to have people who are going to be either side. It's kind of like the yin and the yang. And it's awesome that, you know, that's a cool part of the diversity of people, that we have those different types of people, and through those two different polar opposites in the extremes, you know, those, I don't know if opposing is the right word, but like those two different modes of being, the excessive planning or the excessive kind of just living in the moment without planning things ahead. Those both have their benefits and negatives, and we really benefit from having friends who, you know, have the opposite trait in them, and that's going to be really helpful. You know, that will help us to let go more, and having friends like us will help some other friends to actually think a bit more about their life and what they want to do. And it's just a really cool, mutually beneficial system. And especially in adolescence, often what happens is you idealize the opposite of what you have. And you know, I definitely do that, because even in this conversation, I didn't really think of it as like there being other people who have the kind of opposite problem to this quote until you brought it up. And then obviously it seems, you know, it seems obvious, but you can idealize that other part. But it's really nice when you start to realize that actually that has its shadow side for the other people. So don't envy someone who has the opposite perspective to you, but you can learn from them and enjoy hanging out with them. And and become more balanced. But you don't need to be this perfect, like Zen down the middle, a foot in both of these things. You're naturally going to have ones that you tend to more than the other, and that's going to flavor your unique personality. But part of kind of integrating yourself more and becoming a better version of yourself is at least playing with the other sides of the spectrum and becoming better at those things, even if it's not your innate sort of talents.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting area. I like to think that a few people listening will benefit from hearing that thing of, yeah, it always feels like the grass is greener, but there is the potential for so much acceptance actually with the tendency that we have for either tight control or just vagueness and looseness, you know, on those two extremes, you know, because we will be on that spectrum. We will have a tendency more for really wanting to have it figured out, or a tendency for maybe more confusion and just for this kind of vagueness. And it's so great. That's another part of growing up. And I think not just growing up, because I don't think that really doesn't quite give enough respect for, say, I think both of our dedication to self exploration and self-help and self-development and, you know, spirituality and these things that help to make you more at ease with your tendencies and to challenge your tendencies, because it isn't just an aspect of growing up to explore those things, you know, though that can be done very deliberately as well. But I do think that it's so fun, and I don't really reflect on it enough in a way, but I'd say I feel very, very grateful to have a better understanding of what I'm basically like. You know, what are my tendencies? What are my habits? What do I feel more comfortable in? And what do I feel less comfortable in? And then just being at ease with the fact that, yeah, like I'm never going to be one of those people that will just like spontaneously start like dancing in the street, or like being really loud, or like being the fucking life and soul of the party. Like that isn't going to be me. Like I can play with those things, as you say, like that's fun. You know, I can put myself out of my comfort zone. I can put myself in those positions. That's great. But I don't slip into those roles. I've never found that I fit them easily. And that's cool. People that are like that often do want to be more reflective, or they want to be quieter, or they want to be the ones having the deeper conversations at the party or whatever. Like, but they're not, you know. And so it's so great to notice like, oh, I'm not everything, and that's cool. Like, and I can hang out exactly as you say. Like, you know, my best friend growing up, Jamie, you know, like I'd say is like really, we're so different, you know, like he is like the life and soul of the party, and he's like such a host and like just, you know, wants to get people together. But we're so different, you know. His kind of extroverted socialite aspects of his character, you know, I've kind of envied that at times, and his ease around that. But like we hung out because we would balance each other out in that way. You know, like I could bring him back down to earth, and he could challenge me and like get me out of my comfort zone and get me doing things that I would never have done on my own. So that's like beautiful. We can complement each other as people, which is just so fun.
Well, that seems like an awesome place to move on to next week's quote.
I'm currently reading a book called Revelations, The Clergy Questioned by Mary Loudon. And it's essentially like interviewing priests and stuff about their faith, which I was quite intrigued by. Yeah, and this is a quote from Mary Loudon. You usually learn the most from interviewing those with whom you disagree.
Very nice.
Thank you so much for listening. It means a huge amount that each week we have consistent listeners and people that keep on showing up. If you've enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed the podcast in general, if you can just think of anyone that you think would appreciate it too and share it with them, that would be really awesome. It's so lovely getting comments back from you as well. Like if you ever want to get in touch, if you're enjoying particular aspects or if you are not enjoying other aspects, then just get in touch. We are on Instagram, 𝗚𝗲cie𝗿𝗿, and our email is also in the description for this episode. Yeah, just reach out. It's so fun to hear from you. It's really, really nice. And if you fancied contributing towards, you know, I bought a mic for this show, you know, there's like other bits and pieces that we end up having to spend money on. So if you fancy contributing towards the podcast continuing, we've got a link to our Ko-fi account in the description for this episode. So much love. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Peace.